They threw her to the floor of the servants' quarters like discarded meat. "You're lucky the Alpha King even lets you breathe the same air as his pups," sneered Valen, the head beta, pressing his boot against the small of her back. Lyra didn't flinch. She'd learned long ago that flinching only fed them. Somewhere above, 3 floors up, behind gilded doors, the Alpha King's twin pups were screaming again. Inconsolable. Feral with grief for a mother they'd never know. Every healer, every nanny, every wolf in Ashenmoor Pack had failed to quiet them. And no one, not a single soul, thought to send the scarred Omega with no wolf and no name. The Ashenmoor Pack house sat like a crown of black stone atop the ridge, its towers clawing at a bruised winter sky. Inside, the walls shook with the sound of 2 tiny voices wailing in unison, a pitch so raw, so primal, it rattled the marrow of every wolf within a mile radius. Nox and Sable, the Alpha King's twin pups, 3 months old, born the night their mother died. Lyra heard them from the basement, always the basement. She pressed her forehead against the cold pipe running along the ceiling, feeling the vibration of their cries travel through the metal like a pulse. Her hands were cracked from scrubbing the stone floors of the East Wing, her knees bruised through the thin fabric of her uniform. The Omega mark on her wrist, a faded crescent branded into her skin the day she arrived, itched in the cold. She wasn't supposed to go above the 2nd floor. That was Rule 12. Omegas don't approach the Alpha's private quarters. Omegas don't speak unless spoken to. Omegas don't look the ranked wolves in the eye. She knew every rule the way a prisoner knows the walls of their cell, by feel, by repetition, by the bruises left when she forgot. But the crying. God. The crying. It had been 4 days now, 4 days of the twins screaming without pause, their tiny wolf instincts rejecting every hand that reached for them. The healers said it was a bond rupture. The severed connection to their dead mother had left a wound in their spirits that wouldn't close. They thrashed in their crib, tiny claws extended, eyes flickering between human brown and wolf gold. They'd bitten 3 nannies, scratched a healer so deep she needed stitches. Alpha King Kalen had ordered every unmated female in the territory to try calming them. One by one, they filed through the nursery like contestants in some grim audition. Kira, the elegant she-wolf who openly campaigned to become the next Luna, lasted 45 seconds before Nox drew blood from her wrist. She'd left the nursery with her silk blouse ruined and murder in her eyes. "They need their mother," whispered Marin, one of the kitchen Omegas, as she and Lara scrubbed pots that night. "And she's in the ground." Lyra said nothing. She dried a copper pot until she could see her own distorted reflection. Hollow cheeks, dark eyes, the scar that curved from her left temple to her jaw like a river on a map. A souvenir from her first week at Ashenmoor, when she'd accidentally made eye contact with a beta, and he'd corrected her with the back of a silver ring. The copper pot. She kept it on the shelf beside her cot every night. Not because it was valuable, because when she polished it, she could see herself, and remembering her own face felt like the last act of rebellion she had left. That night, the crying reached a new pitch, a sound like something tearing. Lyra lay on her thin mattress in the Omega dormitory, staring at the ceiling, and felt something inside her chest answer. Not her wolf. She didn't have one, or so they all believed. Something deeper, something that lived beneath the place where a wolf should be, curled in the dark like an ember wrapped in ash. She sat up. The dormitory was silent except for the breathing of the other Omegas. 12 cots in a row, 12 women who had learned to sleep through anything. Lyra swung her legs over the side and pressed her bare feet to the frozen stone floor. She didn't think. She didn't plan. She simply stood, pulled her threadbare shawl around her shoulders, and walked. Up the basement stairs, past the kitchen, through the servants' corridor that ran behind the great hall. She could hear Beta Valen's voice somewhere, laughing, always laughing, and she pressed herself into the shadows until it passed. Up the second-floor staircase, where the carpet changed from bare stone to something soft and deep. Past the portraits of former Lunas, their painted eyes watching her with expressions she couldn't read. Third floor, the Alpha's wing. The air here smelled different, cedar and iron and something electric that made her teeth ache. The crying was deafening now, a wall of sound that pressed against her like a physical thing. 2 guards stood outside the nursery door, their faces gray with exhaustion. One of them, a young wolf named Thomas, saw her, and his eyes went wide. "What the hell are you doing up here, Omega?" "I can help," Lyra said. Her voice came out steady, which surprised her. The other guard actually laughed. "You? The mute floor scrubber? Every ranked female in this pack has tried. The Alpha's own sister tried. Go back to your hole." But behind the door, one of the twins, Sable, she somehow knew it was Sable, let out a cry so sharp and desperate that Lyra felt it in her ribs like a blade. "Please," she said, not begging, stating. "Let me try." Thomas looked at his partner. His partner shrugged with the resigned expression of a man who'd been standing outside a screaming room for 96 hours. The door opened. The nursery was beautiful and destroyed. A handcrafted mobile of silver moons hung twisted from the ceiling. Blankets were shredded. The walls bore tiny claw marks at crib height. And in the center of it all, in a crib carved from ancient oak, 2 tiny bodies writhed and screamed with their eyes squeezed shut, their faces red, their small fists beating the air. Lyra didn't approach the crib. She sat down on the floor, 6 feet away, and did something no one else had thought to do. She began to hum. It was a melody she didn't remember learning, a lullaby in a language she couldn't name, with notes that moved in intervals that didn't belong to any scale she knew. It rose and fell like breathing, like a tide, like the heartbeat of something vast and patient. Knox stopped screaming first. His tiny body went rigid, then slowly, his fists uncurled, his eyes opened, not brown, not gold, but a deep, liquid silver that reflected Lyra's face back at her like twin mirrors. Sable followed. Her cries softened to whimpers, then to hitching breaths, then to silence. The silence was so sudden, so complete that one of the guards dropped his weapon. Both pups turned their heads toward Lyra with identical expressions of bewildered recognition, as if they'd been searching for her voice their entire short lives, and had finally found it. Lyra kept humming. She didn't dare stop. Tears ran down her cheeks, but her voice held steady, and the pups, the Alpha King's savage, inconsolable, untouchable twins, reached their tiny arms toward her and cooed. By morning, the entire pack knew. The whispers moved through Ashenmoor like smoke through a cracked chimney, fast, acrid, impossible to contain. The Omega. The scarred one. The one who scrubs floors and never speaks. She walked into the nursery and silenced the Alpha King's twins in under 2 minutes. Lyra sat in the kitchen peeling turnips while the world rearranged itself around her. Marin kept shooting her looks from the stove, wide-eyed, half terrified, half reverent. "They're saying the pups slept 6 straight hours," Marin whispered. "First time since they were born. Thomas told the head beta, and the head beta told everyone. Lyra finished. She peeled the turnip with mechanical precision, the blade curving through the skin in one long, unbroken spiral. I know. The Alpha King wants to see you. The knife stopped. Lyra had been at Ashenmoor for 3 years. In that time, she had never once been in the same room as Alpha King Kalen. She'd seen him, of course. Everyone saw the Alpha. He moved through the pack house like a weather system, all barely contained force and dark energy. Tall, broad, a jaw carved from granite, and eyes the color of a winter storm. He wore his authority the way other men wore cologne. It preceded him into every room. She'd heard the stories, too. How he'd taken the crown at 22 after his father's assassination. How he'd unified 3 warring packs through a combination of strategic brilliance and terrifying violence. How his mate, Luna Sarah, had died giving birth to the twins, and how he'd torn apart the healing wing with his bare hands when they told him she was gone. He hadn't taken another mate, hadn't even looked at another woman. The Luna trial, the formal ritual by which a new Luna would be chosen, had been postponed 3 times. The pack elders were getting restless. Lyra, Marin's hand on her arm. Are you breathing? She was not. They came for her at noon. Not Thomas this time, but Beta Valen himself, tall, golden-haired, with a smile that never reached his eyes. He looked at Lyra the way a cat looks at something it's already decided to eat. The Alpha King requests your presence in the South study. You will not speak unless asked a direct question. You will not look at him. You will curtsy when you enter, and again when you leave. You have 5 minutes. He paused, his smile sharpening. And for the love of the moon goddess, do something about your hair. Lyra followed him through corridors she'd only ever cleaned. The South study was a room she'd scrubbed on her hands and knees. She knew the pattern of the wood grain, the chip in the baseboard near the window. The way the afternoon light fell through the stained glass and painted the floor in fractured amber and blue. She didn't expect the room to feel different with him in it. But it did. The air was heavier, charged, like standing in a field before lightning strikes. Kalen stood with his back to her, staring out the window. He didn't turn when she entered. She curtsied anyway, her knees protesting against the cold stone beneath the thin rug. Name, he said. His voice was low, rough-edged, as if he hadn't used it much recently. Lyra, Your Majesty. No surname? None that I know of. He turned then, and she understood why the other wolves talked about him in hushed tones. It wasn't just the physical presence, though that was considerable. It was the weight of him, the gravity. He was a man who carried grief like a second skeleton beneath his skin, and it made him denser than other people. His eyes found the scar on her face and stayed there for 1 beat too long. She kept her gaze on the floor, as instructed, but she could feel his attention like heat. They tell me you're a wolfless Omega, arrived 3 years ago with no memory, no pack affiliation, no identification. The healers examined you and found no wolf spirit, classified you as Omega by default, and assigned you to domestic service. He paused. Is that accurate? Yes, Your Majesty. And last night you violated pack protocol, entered a restricted floor, and approached my children without authorization. A statement, not a question. She remained silent. Look at me. She lifted her eyes. The impact was immediate, a jolt that traveled from her chest to her fingertips, like touching a live wire. His eyes were gray, not the storm gray she'd expected, but something warmer, shot through with threads of silver. For a fraction of a second, something flickered behind them. Surprise, maybe. Confusion. Then it was gone, replaced by the practiced blankness of a king. "How did you do it?" "I hummed a lullaby, Your Majesty." "Everyone has tried singing to them." "I wasn't singing to them." The words left her mouth before she could stop them. "I was singing to the place inside them where their mother's bond used to be, the empty space. I filled it with sound so it wouldn't echo." The silence that followed was so complete, she could hear the fire breathing in the hearth. Kaelin stared at her for a long time. Then he did something she never expected. He reached into his breast pocket and withdrew a small object, a moonstone pendant, milky white, hanging from a thin silver chain. The light caught its surface, and it glowed from within, casting faint prismatic shadows on his palm. "This was my mate's," he said quietly. "She wore it every day. I put it in the crib the night they were born. Thought it might." He stopped, swallowed. "They won't stop screaming long enough to feel it." He set the pendant on the desk between them. An offering, a test, a father's desperation dressed up as a king's command. "You will report to the nursery at dawn. You will remain with the pups until they sleep. If they respond to you again, we'll discuss a more permanent arrangement." His jaw tightened. "If this is some kind of trick, if you've used herbs or dark craft or anything that endangers my children, I will end you myself. Are we clear?" "Crystal, Your Majesty." She curtsied. She left. She made it exactly 4 steps into the corridor before her knees gave out, and she slid down the wall to the floor with her hand over her mouth, shaking. Inside her chest, in the dark place where a wolf should have been, something stirred. Not a growl, not a howl, a vibration, low, warm, ancient, like a tuning fork struck against something made of bone and starlight. She pressed her hand to her sternum and felt it hum. For 2 weeks, Lyra lived between worlds. By day, she scrubbed floors, peeled vegetables, and endured the casual cruelty of pack hierarchy. By night, she sat in the nursery with Nox and Sable, humming them through the dark hours while the pack house slept. The twins responded to her with an intensity that frightened the healers. They would cry the moment she left and quiet the instant she returned, as if her presence was oxygen and her absence was drowning. She learned their language. Nox was the bold one. He grabbed everything, his tiny fists closing around her fingers, her hair, the fabric of her shawl, with a grip that said, "Mine." Sable was the watcher. She would lie still, her enormous silver eyes tracking Lyra's every movement with an intelligence that seemed impossible for a 3-month-old. When Lyra hummed, Sable's lips would move slightly, as if trying to learn the melody. Lyra took to wearing Lunacera's moonstone pendant while she sat with them. Kaelin hadn't told her to. She'd simply picked it up from the desk where he'd left it that first day, and the moment it touched her skin, the twins had gone utterly still, staring at the stone against her collarbone, with an expression that looked heartbreakingly like hope. She should have known it would cost her. The trouble started with Kira. Kira Ashvine was the daughter of the Pack's High Elder, and she had been groomed for the Luna position since birth. Beautiful in the way that sharp things are beautiful, all cheekbones and ice-blue eyes, and a smile that could cut glass. She had powerful allies, a lineage that stretched back 7 generations, and an absolute, bone-deep certainty that she would be the one to stand beside Alpha King Kaelin when the Luna trial finally commenced. The idea that a wolfless, scarred, nameless Omega had succeeded where she had failed had bled, actually, from the teeth of the pups who now cooed at Lyra like she was their personal sunrise, was not something Kira's worldview could accommodate. So she did what powerful people always do when confronted with something that threatens their narrative. She rewrote the story. "She's using blood magic," Kira announced at the Pack Council meeting, her voice carrying the precise mix of concern and authority she'd been rehearsing since childhood. "My sources in the Healer's Wing confirmed that the Omega has been seen burning herbs in the nursery. Unsanctioned herbs, the kind used in forbidden bonding rituals." It was a lie. A complete, architecturally perfect lie, constructed with the same care a mason uses to build a wall, every stone placed to bear the weight of the stones above it, the council murmured. Beta Valen, who had never liked Lyra and whose authority had been subtly undermined by her access to the Alpha's floor, nodded gravely. "I've had my own concerns. The Omega has been presumptuous, wearing the late Luna's pendant, moving through restricted areas without escort." They didn't ask Lyra. They never asked Lyra. That was the beautiful efficiency of the hierarchy. You didn't need to hear from the accused when everyone already agreed on the verdict. The punishment came at dawn. Lyra was dragged from the nursery by 2 enforcement wolves, while Nox and Sable screamed behind her, that same tearing, desperate sound that had first drawn her upstairs. They took her to the courtyard, the one she'd scrubbed 100 times, and they made her kneel on the frost-covered stone in her thin sleeping clothes, while the morning shift gathered to watch. Kira stood on the steps above her, luminous in a white fur coat, holding a scroll with the council's seal. "Lyra, Omega classification, no surname. You are charged with the unauthorized use of forbidden rituals within the Alpha King's residence, the theft and inappropriate wearing of the late Luna's personal effects, and the violation of Pack Code 12, unauthorized presence in the Alpha's private quarters." Each charge landed like a stone dropped into still water. For these offenses, the Council prescribes removal from nursery duties, effective immediately, forfeiture of the stolen pendant, and 20 lashes to be administered publicly as a reminder that rank exists for a reason. Lyra's blood turned to ice, not from fear, from recognition. She had seen this before, not here, not at Ashenmoor, but somewhere in the mist-covered territory of her lost memories. A woman kneeling, false charges, the crack of punishment falling on innocent skin. The image was so vivid it almost knocked her sideways, but it vanished before she could hold it, leaving only the metallic taste of old terror on her tongue. "Wait." Lyra's voice was quiet, but it carried. "The Alpha King himself authorized my presence in the nursery. He gave me permission to—" "The Alpha King is not here," Kira said, and something triumphant flashed in her ice-blue eyes. "He left before dawn for the border negotiations. He'll be gone for 3 days. The council acts in his stead." Of course they'd waited for him to leave. The whip was leather, braided tight, with small metal beads woven into the tips. Lyra knew this because she'd cleaned blood off the courtyard stones after previous punishments. She'd always wondered, distantly, what it felt like. Now she knew. The first lash stole her breath. The second split her skin. By the 5th, she'd bitten through her lower lip to keep from screaming, and the copper taste of blood filled her mouth. She kept her eyes open, fixed on a single point, a crack in the courtyard wall where, improbably, a small green shoot had pushed through the stone. Life, stubborn and stupid and brave, growing in a place that should have killed it. By the 10th lash, something happened. The dark place inside her chest, the empty space where a wolf should have been, cracked open. Not gently, not gradually. It cracked the way ice cracks on a frozen lake, when something enormous moves beneath the surface. She felt heat, searing, impossible heat, flood through her veins, and for one terrifying second, Her vision went white. The enforcer with the whip stumbled backward. Later, he would say he felt a pulse of energy, a shockwave, invisible but undeniable, that pushed him 3 feet across the courtyard. But no one else saw it. No one else felt it. And when Lyra's vision cleared, she was still kneeling on the stones, her back a ruin of blood and torn skin, the green shoot in the crack still reaching stubbornly toward a sky it would never touch. They dragged her back to the basement and left her on her cot. Marin came with wet cloths and antiseptic that burned worse than the whip. Neither of them spoke. But in the nursery, 3 floors above, Knox and Sable had gone silent in a way that wasn't sleep. Their eyes were open, silver and unblinking, and every wolf who walked past the door felt the hair on their arms rise, because the air around those pups had changed. It smelled like ozone before a storm, like something ancient, waking up. Kaelin returned from the border negotiations on the 3rd day to a pack house that felt wrong. He couldn't name it at first. A king's instincts are trained on large-scale threats, armies and assassins and political betrayals. But this was subtler, a frequency shift. The way the servant's eyes slid away from his. The way Valen's smile was a fraction too wide. The way the nursery was silent, not the peaceful silence of sleeping pups, but the heavy, pressurized silence of something coiled. He went to the nursery first, always the nursery first. Knox and Sable lay in their crib, still and staring. They didn't cry when he lifted them. They didn't reach for him. They lay in his arms like small, warm statues, their silver eyes fixed on a point somewhere past his shoulder, as if waiting for someone who wasn't there. "Where is the Omega?" he asked, and the temperature in the room dropped 3 degrees. No one answered immediately. Thomas the young guard opened his mouth, then closed it. He looked at his feet. "Where?" Kaelin repeated, his voice carrying the subsonic rumble that preceded an alpha command. "Is the woman I assigned to care for my children?" The story came out in pieces, from Thomas, who had the decency to look ashamed, from the head healer, who had examined Lyra's back and filed a quiet report, from Marin, who was shaking so hard she could barely stand, but who refused to let the truth stay buried. Kaelin listened to all of it. His face showed nothing. Absolutely nothing. It was the blankness of deep water, still on the surface, with currents beneath that could pull you under and never let you up. When the last word was spoken, he said, "Bring me Kira Ashvine. Bring me Beta Valen. Bring me every council member who signed that order." Then he went to the basement. He had never been to the Omega quarters. Most alphas hadn't. It existed below the level of their attention, like the foundation of a building. Necessary, invisible, deliberately forgotten. The corridor was narrow, the ceiling low, the air thick with the smell of damp stone and industrial soap. The fluorescent lights buzzed and flickered with the irregular heartbeat of old wiring. He found Lyra on her cot, lying on her stomach because her back wouldn't allow any other position. Marin had done her best with bandages, but the blood had soaked through in dark, irregular blooms. The copper pot sat on the shelf beside her, the only personal item in the entire sparse space. She didn't look up when he entered. She might not have been able to. Lyra. His voice was different down here, stripped of the acoustic authority that the high-ceilinged rooms of his wing gave it. Down here, he was just a man standing in a basement, looking at what his kingdom had done in his name. "Your Majesty." She tried to rise. The movement opened 2 of the deeper lashes and fresh blood welled through the bandages. "Don't." The word came out rough. He crossed the room in 3 strides and knelt, the Alpha King of Ashenmoor, on his knees on the floor of the Omega dormitory, and his hands hovered over her shoulders without touching, because there was nowhere to touch that wouldn't cause pain. "I didn't authorize this." His voice was barely above a whisper. "I need you to know that. I gave orders that you were to have access to the nursery. Protected access. This was not—" He stopped. Breathed. "This was done behind my back, and everyone responsible will answer for it." Lyra turned her head just enough to see him. One eye, dark and steady, finding his face. She looked at him the way she looked at everything, with the careful, measured attention of someone who has learned that the world is mostly made of traps. "They said I stole the pendant," she murmured. "You didn't steal anything. I left it for you." His jaw worked. "I should have made that explicit. I should have issued a formal decree. I assumed—" He broke off again, and she watched something move across his face that looked like self-recrimination. "I assumed my word was enough. It isn't. Not in this pack. Not with these politics." He reached into his coat and withdrew the moonstone pendant. They'd confiscated it from Lyra before the punishment, and he'd found it on Kira's vanity, displayed like a trophy. He set it on the shelf beside the copper pot. The moonstone and the copper caught the fluorescent light and held it differently, one with the cool patience of the moon, the other with the warm stubbornness of the earth. "When you can stand," he said, "you'll be moved to the room adjoining the nursery. Permanent quarters. You'll have the title of royal caretaker. Your meals will come from the main kitchen, not the scraps from the servant's table. No one will touch you again." Each sentence fell like a decree, heavy with finality. "And the Luna trial commences in 1 month. I want you to know, regardless of who is chosen, your position with my children is secure. That's not a promise from an alpha. It's a promise from their father." He stood, paused at the door. "That lullaby you sing to them, the melody, where did you learn it?" Lyra closed her eyes. "I don't know. It's the only thing I brought with me when I lost my memory. The only thing that's mine." Kaelin was quiet for a long moment. Then, "I've heard it before. My mate, Sarah, she used to hum it in her sleep. I never knew where she learned it either." He left before she could respond. But the words hung in the damp air of the basement like a prophecy no one had learned to read yet. A thread connecting a dead Luna, a wolfless Omega, and 2 silver-eyed pups who would not sleep for anyone else. In the darkness of the dormitory, Lyra pressed her hand to her chest and felt the thing inside her shift again. Stronger this time, more defined. Not a stirring, a stretching. Like something that had been asleep for a very, very long time was finally opening its eyes. And for the first time, it didn't feel like an empty space. It felt like a door. The Luna trial was the oldest ritual in werewolf law, a ceremonial gauntlet designed to test the worthiness of a potential Luna through 3 ancient challenges: the trial of spirit, the trial of bond, and the trial of blood. It was meant to be a sacred process, presided over by the Moon Elders and witnessed by the entire pack. In practice, it was a political knife fight, dressed in ceremonial robes. The candidates gathered in the Great Hall on the first day of the crescent moon. 5 women, each representing a powerful bloodline, each groomed since childhood for this moment. Kira Ashvine stood at their center, still beautiful, still confident, though Lyra noticed a new tightness around her mouth. Alpha King Kaelin had publicly censured the council for the unauthorized punishment, stripped Beta Valen of his enforcement privileges, and issued a formal apology to Lyra that had been read aloud in the dining hall. Kira had not been directly named, but everyone knew. The humiliation clung to her like perfume she couldn't wash off. Lyra watched from the balcony reserved for household staff. She wasn't a candidate, Omegas couldn't enter the Luna trial. It was law, immutable as gravity, older than memory. She told herself she was fine with this. She had a warm room now, adjacent to the nursery, with a real bed and a window that faced east. She had the twins, who had grown fat and rosy in the weeks since her return, who grabbed fistfuls of her hair and laughed, who slept through the night when she hummed to them. She had something she'd never had at Ashenmore before, a small, fragile sense of belonging. She told herself it was enough. The trial of spirit came first, a test of character conducted by the Moon Elders, 3 ancient wolves whose eyes had gone permanently silver from decades of communion with the lunar cycle. Each candidate entered a sealed chamber and faced a series of moral dilemmas presented through psychic projection. The details were private, but the results were public. 3 candidates passed. 2 failed. Kira passed. Of course Kira passed. The trial of Bond came second, and this was the one that changed everything. The Bond trial tested a candidate's spiritual compatibility with the Alpha. Each woman would place her hand on a bonding stone, a massive chunk of raw moonstone the size of a man's torso, ancient beyond reckoning, its surface smooth from millennia of palms. If the stone recognized the bond potential, it would glow. Simple. Elegant. Incorruptible, because the stone couldn't be bribed, threatened, or politically maneuvered. Kira placed her hand on the stone. Nothing happened. She pressed harder. Leaned in, the crowd held its breath. The stone remained dark, cold, inert, as if she were pressing her hand against ordinary rock. The second candidate tried. Nothing. The third, nothing. Murmurs rippled through the hall. In the recorded history of Ashenmore, the bonding stone had never failed to respond to at least one candidate during a Luna trial. The Moon Elders conferred in whispered urgency. Kalen sat on his throne, his expression unreadable, his fingers wrapped around the armrests hard enough to creak the wood. Then something happened that was not in the script. Knox began to cry. Not the regular fussy cry of a teething infant, the other cry. The deep, primal wail that vibrated at a frequency only wolves could fully hear, the one that carried the subsonic signature of distress so profound it triggered the protective instincts of every bonded wolf in the room. Sable joined a second later. Their combined cry hit the great hall like a physical force, and several wolves staggered. Lyra, on the balcony, was already moving before she made the conscious decision to move. Down the stairs, through the crowd, past the ceremonial guards who were too shocked to stop her. She reached the twins' portable crib at the base of the throne and lifted them, one in each arm, their faces buried in her neck, their tiny bodies shaking. She hummed. The melody rose above the chaos like a single clear note cutting through static, and the twins quieted so fast it looked like a magic trick. Lyra stood there, holding the Alpha King's children in the middle of the most sacred ritual in werewolf law, wearing a servant's uniform and a dead Luna's moonstone pendant, and every eye in the hall was on her. That was when the bonding stone lit up. Not a subtle glow, not a gentle warming. The stone erupted with light, blinding, white gold, pouring from its surface like liquid sunlight. The light didn't radiate outward in all directions. It reached. It extended in a single, focused beam that crossed the hall and struck Lyra square in the chest. The impact drove her back a step, but she didn't fall. She couldn't. She was holding the twins. The light wrapped around all 3 of them like a cocoon, and inside that cocoon, Lyra felt the door in her chest blow open. What came through was not a wolf. It was something older, something that existed before wolves had names, before packs had laws, before the moon was worshipped. It poured into her like a river breaking a dam, filling every hollow space, every scar, every dark corner where pain had lived. Her eyes, always dark brown, flooded with silver until they were mirror bright, reflecting the faces of every stunned wolf in the hall. The moonstone pendant at her throat shattered. Not broke, shattered, releasing a burst of prismatic light that scattered across the ceiling like 1,000 tiny stars. And from the fragments, a new shape formed, a constellation of light that briefly, unmistakably, took the shape of a wolf. Not just any wolf, a Lunas wolf, the first wolf, the original template from which all Luna spirits descended. A myth so old, most wolves considered it a fairy tale. The light faded. The stone went dark. Lyra stood in the center of the great hall, panting, silver-eyed, holding 2 now sleeping pups against her chest, and realized with the absolute clarity of someone who has just been struck by lightning that she was not, had never been, a wolfless Omega. She was a moonborn, the last of a bloodline that had been hunted to extinction 3 generations ago. And the reason she had no memories was because someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to make sure she never found out. The great hall erupted. Kira screamed something, an accusation, a denial. The words didn't matter because no one was listening. The moon elders dropped to their knees. Kalen rose from his throne, his face stripped of every mask he'd ever worn, showing something raw and terrified and desperately, painfully hopeful beneath. And Lyra just stood there, holding his children, feeling the wolf inside her stretch and breathe for the first time in her life, and thought, "Oh, there you are, I've been waiting for you." The revelation split Ashenmoor in 2. On one side, the truth. The bonding stone had spoken. The moon elders confirmed what the light had shown. Lyra carried the spirit of a moonborn wolf, a bloodline so ancient and so powerful that its last known members had been systematically murdered during the Purge of Silver Falls 25 years ago. A genocide ordered by a coalition of threatened alphas who feared the moonborn's ability to see through lies, heal broken bonds, and, most dangerously, challenge the authority of any alpha whose rule was unjust. On the other side, Kira Ashvain, and everyone who had built their futures on the architecture of the old power structure. They moved fast. 3 days after the trial, Lyra woke to find a formal challenge document slid under her door, a petition of fraud signed by Kira and 14 members of the Pack Council, demanding that the Luna trial results be invalidated on the grounds that an unregistered individual of unknown origin and fabricated bloodline could not legally participate in a ceremony reserved for wolves of verified lineage. It was clever, vicious, and clever, because Lyra had no proof of her bloodline beyond the bonding stone's response, and the stone, according to the petition, could have been tampered with, corrupted, or influenced by the same dark rituals the accused has previously been suspected of employing. They were going to use her missing past against her. Every gap in her memory, every unanswered question about her origin, became a weapon in their hands. But they had miscalculated in one critical way. They had assumed Kalen would stay neutral. The Alpha King called an emergency assembly the following morning. He stood on the dais in the Great Hall, the same hall where the bonding stone still sat, dark and cooling, and addressed his pack with the kind of controlled fury that made seasoned warriors go pale. "I have read the petition of fraud," he said, his voice filling the hall without amplification, the way thunder fills a valley. "I find it legally baseless, morally bankrupt, and personally offensive. The bonding stone is not a political instrument. It cannot be bribed, it cannot be threatened, it cannot be made to lie, In 800 years of recorded pack history, its judgment has never been questioned, until it chose someone who doesn't fit the Council's preferred narrative. He let that land. The silence was surgical. However, he turned to face Kira, who stood with her allies in a tight knot of expensive fabrics and barely concealed panic. In the interest of absolute transparency, I am ordering a full investigation into Lyra's origins, not to validate or invalidate the stone's choice. That is not within anyone's authority, but to uncover the truth about her past. Because something was done to this woman. Her memory was erased, her wolf was suppressed, her identity was stolen, and whoever did those things is still out there. He paused. His eyes swept the hall, and Lyra, watching from the side, where a royal caretaker stood, saw them linger on certain faces. Kira's father, the High Elder, two of the senior council members, Beta Valen, whose enforcement privileges had been restored just days ago by the council vote Kaelin hadn't been present to block. Whoever did those things, Kaelin repeated softly, is in this room. The investigation began that afternoon. Kaelin assigned it to Ronan, his most trusted warrior, a massive, silent wolf with a reputation for finding things people wanted to stay hidden. Ronan started with the pack's intake records from 3 years ago, the night Lyra had been found unconscious at the border with no memory and no wolf. What he found was damning. The intake report had been falsified. The healer who'd examined Lyra and declared her wolfless, Dr. Thane, a nervous, thin-faced man who smelled perpetually of antiseptic, had recorded a standard examination. But when Ronan pulled the original intake forms from the archive, the handwriting didn't match. The original form, buried under 3 years of other paperwork, told a different story. Lyra had arrived at the border with a wolf, a powerful one. The original examiner, a different healer, one who had since transferred to another pack, had noted anomalous spiritual readings, recommended immediate escalation to the Moon Elders, and flagged Lyra as a potential high-rank wolf in suppression. That report had been intercepted, replaced. The original examiner had been paid off and relocated. And the suppression hadn't been accidental. There were traces of wolfsbane concentrate in Lyra's bloodwork from that first night. Medical-grade wolfsbane, the kind used in wolf suppression therapy, the kind that only licensed pack healers had access to. Someone had drugged her, erased her memory, killed her wolf, and then filed paperwork that turned her into a nobody. Ronan brought the evidence to Kaelin at midnight. Lyra was there. Kaelin had insisted she be present for every finding, a gesture of respect that made her chest ache with something she was afraid to name. "The trail leads to Dr. Thane," Ronan said, his voice a low rumble. "But Thane doesn't have the resources or the motive for something this sophisticated. He's a tool. Someone else directed this." "Who?" Lyra asked. Her voice was steady, but her hands were shaking. She gripped the edge of the desk to still them, and her knuckles turned white around an object she'd unconsciously grabbed. A fragment of the shattered moonstone pendant, which she'd been carrying in her pocket since the trial. It was warm to the touch, like a living thing. Ronan looked at Kaelin. Kaelin looked at the evidence spread across his desk. Falsified documents, financial records, transfer orders, a trail of carefully buried breadcrumbs that led, with the inexorable logic of a river finding the sea, to one name: High Elder Ashvane, Kira's father, the architect of the Silver Falls Purge, the man who had ordered the extermination of the Moonborn bloodline 25 years ago, the man who had somehow missed one, a child, perhaps, hidden by her parents before the end, and who, when that child surfaced at his pack's border 3 years later, had ensured she would never remember who she was. Lyra looked at the name on the document and felt the world tilt. Not with shock, with recognition. The mist over her memories thinned just for a moment, and she saw a flash. A woman with her face, older, terrified, pressing a moonstone pendant into a child's hands and whispering, "Remember the song. Whatever happens, remember the song." Her mother, giving her the only weapon she had left. The lullaby, the one she'd carried through 3 years of amnesia, through beatings and servitude and loneliness. The one that had called the Alpha King's twins back from the edge of their grief. It wasn't just a song. It was a Moonborn's inheritance. The last surviving fragment of an entire culture someone had tried to burn out of existence. Lyra's fingers closed around the moonstone fragment, and she felt her wolf, fully awake now, fully present, ancient and enormous and luminous with rage, press against the inside of her skin like a caged star. "I remember," she whispered. "I'm starting to remember everything." The trial of High Elder Ashvane was held under the full moon, as pack law demanded for crimes of this magnitude. They gathered in the moonfield, the ancient clearing beyond the pack house where the grass grew silver in the lunar light, where every significant judgment in Ashenmoor's history had been rendered. The entire pack attended. Not by choice, by command. Kalen wanted witnesses. He wanted every wolf in his territory to see what happened when power was used to destroy the innocent. Lyra stood at the center of the field, and she was not the same woman who had knelt on courtyard stones 2 months ago. Her wolf had been returning in stages, like a tide coming in, each wave bringing more of herself back. Her posture had changed first. The perpetual hunch of the Omega was gone, replaced by something straight and sure. Her eyes remained silver. Permanently now, the healers confirmed, a mark of moonborn wolves whose spirits have been suppressed and then released. The scar on her face hadn't healed. Moonborn power wasn't that kind of magic. But it looked different on a woman who stood like she had a right to the space she occupied. She wore the fragments of the moonstone pendant on a new chain, 7 pieces, each one catching the moonlight differently, scattering tiny stars across her collarbones. Broken and reassembled. Still beautiful. More beautiful, perhaps, for having survived the breaking. High Elder Ashvane stood opposite her, flanked by guards. He was a tall man, white-haired, with the distinguished bearing of old money and the flat, careful eyes of someone who had done terrible things and filed them under necessary. He had not confessed. He had lawyered up, brought in advocates from 3 neighboring packs, and constructed a defense built on plausible deniability and procedural technicalities. But Ronan's evidence was overwhelming. The falsified documents, the financial trail, payments to Dr. Thane, to the relocated healer, to 3 separate memory-wiping specialists in other territories, and the final damning piece, a journal found in a hidden compartment in Ashvane's study, in which he had meticulously recorded every step of the Silver Falls purge, including a notation from 3 years ago. Survivor located at eastern border. Female, early 20s, last of the line. Memory suppression administered, wolf sealed, classified as Omega, problem contained. Problem contained. That was what Lyra's life had been reduced to in his handwriting. A problem. A loose end. A survivor of a massacre he'd ordered, tucked away in a basement and forgotten. Kira stood behind her father, and for the first time, her composure had cracked. She hadn't known, the investigation confirmed this, about the purge, about Lyra's true identity, about her father's decades-old campaign against the Moonborn. She had been cruel out of entitlement, not conspiracy. But she had known about the falsified punishment. She had orchestrated the whipping, and that knowledge sat on her face like a stain she couldn't wipe away. Kylan presided from a raised stone platform, the twins in a guarded crib beside him. He wore the ceremonial armor of judgment, black leather, silver clasps, the Alpha King's seal at his throat. He looked every inch the ruler his people needed him to be, immovable, just, and absolutely terrifyingly calm. "Hi, Elder Ashvan," he said, and his voice carried across the moonfield like a bell. "You are charged with the orchestration of the Silver Falls Purge, resulting in the deaths of 37 moonborn wolves, including children. You are charged with the kidnapping and unlawful suppression of Lyra of the moonborn line. You are charged with the falsification of official pack documents. You are charged with conspiracy to deny the pack's rightful Luna her identity and her position. How do you answer?" Ashvane's advocates launched into their defense. Jurisdictional arguments, statute of limitations claims, challenges to the evidence chain. They were good. They were expensive. They knew every loophole in pack law, but they didn't account for the moonborn. Lyra stepped forward. She hadn't planned to speak. The prosecution was being handled by Ronan and the legal team. But her wolf surged inside her, and the words that came out of her mouth weren't prepared. They were remembered. Elias Ashvoin. Her voice carried a harmonic that made the air vibrate, the moonborn's gift, the ability to speak with the weight of truth so absolute it resonated in the bones. "You came to Silver Falls on the night of the winter solstice. You brought 40 wolves. You set fire to the village from 4 directions so no one could escape. My mother put me in a root cellar and covered me with wolfsbane so your trackers couldn't smell me. She gave me her pendant. She sang me the lullaby one last time. And then she went back out to face your wolves, knowing she would die, because if she didn't, they would search until they found me." She was not crying. Her voice was not breaking. She was speaking with the clarity of someone who has finally, completely, remembered. "I was 5 years old. I stayed in that cellar for 2 days, until a passing trader found me. I don't know how I ended up at Ashenmoor's border 18 years later. There are still gaps. But I know what you did. I remember the sound of the fire. I remember my mother's voice. And I remember the smell of wolfsbane, because you used it twice. Once to hide me from your killers, and once to kill the wolf inside me so I could never become what I was meant to be." The moonfield was silent. Wolves wept openly. Ashvain's face had gone the color of old ash. The moonborn truth voice did its work. It was not a compulsion. It didn't force anyone to believe. It simply made lying impossible in its presence. And in that field, under that moon, every wolf present felt the truth of Lyra's words settle into their marrow like a stone dropping to the bottom of a clear pool. The verdict was unanimous. The sentence, permanent exile for Ashvain and the co-conspirators, stripped of name, rank, and pack affiliation. Cast out beyond the borders with nothing but the clothes on their backs and the weight of what they'd done. Kira was not exiled. Her crimes were lesser, her ignorance of the larger conspiracy genuine. But she was stripped of her candidacy, removed from all positions of influence, and assigned to community service under Marin's supervision. The irony of the would-be Luna scrubbing the same floors the Omega she'd whipped had scrubbed was not lost on anyone. As the enforcers led Ashvan from the field, he passed within 3 feet of Lyra. He stopped. The guards tensed. "You should have stayed in that cellar," he said. Quiet. Venomous. The last words of a man who had lost everything and still couldn't see that he'd deserved to. Lyra looked at him. Really looked at him. With her silver eyes that saw through lies. That saw through masks. That saw all the way down to the bedrock of a person. And said, "I did. For 23 years I stayed in the dark. But that's the thing about cellars, Elder. They're not tombs. They're places where things are stored until they're needed. She turned her back on him, walked to the crib where Knox and Sable were reaching for her with their fat, impatient hands, picked them up, held them close. And the moon, full, silver, impossibly bright, poured its light over her like an anointing. If this story reminded you that the people the world throws away are often the ones who change it, hit that like button. If you felt every lash, every lullaby, every moment of Lyra's quiet rebellion, share this video with someone who needs to hear that survival is not surrender. And if you want more stories where karma doesn't just knock, it kicks the door down, subscribe and hit that bell so you never miss an upload. Drop a comment. What hit you hardest? The whipping scene, the bonding stone, or the moonflower at the end? I read every single one. Until next time, remember, the ones they reject are the ones they'll never forget.